Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Startup Unfiltered, the weekly show that allows us to delve deep into the mind of a successful 40-year veteran of the software startup world, Stuart Prestedge. Hello, Stuart. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
And I was and still am Pete Daly Dixon, your co-host on the show. How are you doing, Stuart? We weren't able to meet last week for various reasons. How have you been?
Yeah, very good. Very good. It's always a whirlwind for me, so I have no clue what I was doing last week.
This is the oasis of calm in the midst of your week, isn't it? Where you just have a chance just to stop and.
To be fair, all of my client conversations are like this as well. Where we calmly move forward. So that's not stressful. That's actually thoroughly enjoyable. But it's when I've got a stack of tasks to do and personal stuff as well to do that I'm not on the call, because I give my focus entirely on the call. But when I'm not on the call, I'm like headless chicken. But yeah, all good. Moving forward.
Well, we're glad that you have your head on for this call, because what I wanted to do on this call is there's been some questions that have come up in the Tech Startup Founders Academy, which is the container for this show. And I thought it might be good just to fire a couple at you and just see what comes out of that from a sort of unfiltered truth perspective, just calling it as it is. So let me read the first one to you. And this is from Lee Lawrenson, an active member of the Tech Startup Founders Academy, and he wanted to know, how do you build a commercially sustainable business when your primary markets, and for him they are schools, charities, and small businesses, when they have little budget and potentially long sales cycles? At what point, and he asks, at what point did you stop trying to serve everyone and get ruthless about who you focused on first? So there are some specific questions in there, but perhaps we can both answer the specific questions and maybe broaden out to lessons and learns sort of more generally.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I think it's important to say it might not be possible. It might not be possible to build a commercially viable business if there aren't enough people paying you enough money, costing you little enough to support. And it's best to work that out sooner than later, so that you don't spend lots of time and money and energy on it. But probably more often than not, it's like hard to know. I've been in this situation myself, and I know others in this situation. And one of my founders last week pivoted because he realised it wasn't a viable model. Now, it was a high ticket, but it was high cost of delivery as well. But so, given that you're thinking it might be possible, and I'm thinking off the hoof here, off the hoof. So there are various things you should be doing. Now, obviously, there are sort of two phases of a startup. One is the kind of test, research, discovery phase, where you're trying to get everything working and decide what works with marketing, what the pricing should be, what the customers are that you're focusing on, all that, getting your KPIs in place, all that kind of like setup stuff. And then once you've got a working model, in theory, your revenue should be sort of increasing to a point where you become break even month on month, and then break even overall, and then profit and growth, and which, if you can show this ahead of time, if you can show it in a business plan with forecasting, with few enough risks and assumptions, then you've got potentially investor in the business as well. But that first phase is around discovering that. So you can't, I don't believe, come out of that first phase until you've got something that's working. You're getting revenue. You've measured the average revenue, and it's growing, or at least you're I say profit, but you might be at a loss to start with, but either the loss is reducing or the profit is increasing. So until you've got that, you can't get to a viable business model without some luck, at least something that changes. So
is there just in that, Stuart? Is there an argument also is that if you, I mean, schools, charities, small business, and maybe the micro business is not so much, but all of those organizations, they do have budgets, they do have money, they do have like cash to spend on solving problems, because when problems are solved, that will either reduce cost or give them more time or whatever. So is there an argument possibly there that maybe the articulation of the problem hasn't been done well enough, or not so much?
Not necessarily, because there are a number of factors that might stop you getting to someone paying you, an individual paying you, and then enough individuals on a consistent basis. So, for example, they have limited budgets, so they have their own priorities. So you might be solving a problem that they have that they need to fix and want to fix, but it might not be high enough priority for them at any given time. Or you might not be better than competitors enough. And it's not just about being better than competitors, it's they might be using a solution already to solve or partially solve the problem. There's a pain, there's effort and time and money and energy required to move from one solution to the other, even if that solution is a spreadsheet. So it's the value, the perceived value that you give high enough in a short enough period of time to make it worthwhile to do that switch, for example. So there are many reasons why someone might not pay you, and it might not be because they have no money.
Yeah. I cut you off your train of thought, what you were going to say earlier. I don't know if you can pick up.
I've lost it now. So when do you give up? Well, that's there's no formula that I know of, at least. I had this conversation.
Yeah, he doesn't ask about giving up specifically. I might bring that in as a question later. He says, at what point did you stop trying to serve everyone and get ruthless about who you focused on first?
Well, okay, that's easy to answer. You should do that from the beginning, because the more narrow your focus, the less thinly spread you are, the more you can really understand your ideal customer and their problem, the better the messaging is. So the better the messaging is around their specific needs and them. So I'll give you an example. I don't remember if I've given this example before, but I was standing on the London Underground with my daughter, and there was an advert, and it said London's best something or other. And I thought, that's a global solution. And I said to my daughter, if that said to you the world's best X, would it resonate with you more or less than London's X? And she said, oh no, London's X is definitely, because it speaks to me. I'm a Londoner. That's for me because I'm a Londoner. That is a clear example of where focused messaging resonates with people more than broader messaging.
Yeah. That's great, and real unfiltered advice there. So the specific answer to your question, Lee, if you watch this back, at what point do you stop trying to serve everyone, is right from the very beginning.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's another question from another active and valued member of the Tech Startup Founders Academy, Phil Meekins, and he's got a question around pricing. Specifically around pricing a service for enterprise customers. And he framed it in this perspective of how to price a service for enterprise customers when your product costs zero or close to zero to maintain. The value is the offering, but how do you quote without sounding like a chancer? I'm stuck. So there's some threads in there to pull out, I think.
Yeah. So first of all, it doesn't matter what your product, I believe it doesn't matter what your product costs to deliver and to maintain. It matters what the value is to the person, to the customer, in my opinion. And I always say potential customers they've got a nose for these things. They've got a nose for when you're not confident about your pricing. Now, it is a mindset thing, as you mentioned earlier, Pete. It is a mindset thing, and I've been through this myself, just recently, even, let alone in the last 40 years, where confidence in general comes not magically on its own. It comes through doing something and getting better at it, and realizing it's not such a big, scary thing, and difficult and impossible thing. Confidence comes through doing. And what you've got to do, I think, is you've got to pick what feels right. But very often, I see this very often, and I saw it in myself until quite recently. You think that something's not worth as much as it is. But let's say you pick a value, you've got to deliver that with confidence. You've got to deliver that as if it's like nothing. So that's the price. But what's important is, does this meet your needs? It's kind of, I believe. I'm talking now with my mind on my business, for example, because I know, and this is important as well, I know that the value that I give, or in Phil's case, it will be the value of the product, or his product or service, far outweighs the cost that I'm charging someone. So confidence should come from that. And if you truly believe that something costs more than what the value you're giving, I believe that's a recipe for disaster. You're never going to be confident unless you are a chancer, someone who's disingenuous. So if you truly believe that the value you're giving is more than that, then absolutely you have every right to be confident in the pricing. But you can test it. You can test. Now, it's easier with a service than a product. And I can't remember, does Phil have a product or a service? Because with the service, it's easier to change the pricing. But you can test pricing with product.
It's a service. He has a software platform for identifying scams ahead of time.
It's a product, then. It's a service provided by a product. But
okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so you can test it and see what works. The trouble is, to get statistically significant data, unless you're getting thousands of leads and good conversion rates, it's hard to get the statistically significant numbers on that pricing. So this is technical. There's no formula for this that I'm aware of, except to say, in my experience, people always charge too little.
Yeah, well, that's true is, as you say.
I think it's better.
True is, as you say.
Yeah, true is. I'm becoming a Czech. They don't they don't speak proper, like. But maybe I think I don't know. I'm just thinking about if it's.
I mean, it does kind of broadening out. How does a startup founder figure out what price to put on their on their offering?
Well, there are lower limits and upper limits. Lower limits are set by what makes a viable business. So, for example, you shouldn't charge less than what it costs you to service the client.
Business 101.
Yeah, quite. But sometimes it's hard to know that cost ahead of time. So, for example, services that store media for a user, store videos and things like that, you don't necessarily know what the average usage is going to be. You obviously know how much it costs to store a gigabyte of data, but you don't know what the average usage should be. So you don't actually know over time what someone will cost you either on their lifetime or average per month, whatever. So it's easier said than done. So that's the theoretical lower limit. The upper limit is set by things like competitors, what your competitors charge. What is kind of deemed as sensible. But I see products and services that are charged astronomical prices.
Because there is a link, sort of cut across, but there is a link, isn't there, though, between what something costs and the perceived value of it.
Well,
So
that's
just
it.
just because your competitors are charging this doesn't mean you can't charge like 5 times that, provided
Well,
that you're
there's a lot
delivering 10 times the value.
of services. I think that's easier because you can put yourself in a category of one. If you charge a lot, and you, as I said earlier, you're confident that the value you give, the lifetime value that you give is greater than the value you charge. And I'm 100% confident about that because
Yeah.
I help founders grow as founders, and they take that away for life.
Yeah.
Let alone the ability to get funding and actually get off the ground and succeeded. So that's worth a hell of a lot more than the amount I charge. But I still charge a fair amount for my sort of flagship product. And it's, if you can put yourself in a category of one, people can't compare you against. Now, I don't know of anyone else that does effectively what I do, which is effectively an online incubator with lots of USPs over and above other incubators, for example. But, and again, I've lost my train of thought, sorry. Yes, the more you charge,
We talked about
more,
how you talked about the lower limit. So it's like,
yeah.
what's the upper limit?
Well, as I said, it's whatever's supported. But if you can be confident that you give more value than you're charging, you should be able to charge any amount. But I think there is a, it's not a stigma, what's the right word? For services, there's kind of this massive range, and the more you charge, the more value you perceive. I mean, there are some industry leaders, let's call it, people like Alex Hormozy and Tony Robbins and people like that. They charge hundreds of thousands for a day of their service, day of value, and people pay it. People pay it because the perceived value is more than that. But for products, subscribing to a product, there's this, and I can't remember the word. It's not, as I said, it's not stigma. It's kind of like a zeitgeist. It's kind of like a general consensus that that I think for typically, you should be charging in the order of $10 to $100. You can't be charging thousands a month. Well, having said that, a lady I just spoke to, founder, she's going to be charging $1,000 a month for her service because there's clear value to the customer.
Yeah. Is there a rule of, just before we move on to the last question from Jay, is there any kind of rules of thumb or frameworks within which founders can work while they're attempting to figure out the pricing? Does it come down to their business plan, just running different scenarios and financial models?
That's one of them. The other thing, of course, is, as ever, talk to potential customers. Do your proper validation, your customer surveys. Do it in such a way. I'm a firm believer in asking open questions rather than saying, "Would you pay X?" Ask an open question: is what is this worth to you? First, and then how much would you pay for this? And why is there a difference? Why is there a difference between what it's worth to you and how much you pay? And you ask about, in these conversations, about what have they tried to fix the problem before, and what did that cost them? Now that could be a competitor, or it could be like something they did internally, like some manual process,
different systems cobbled together to make it work. For those listening, they won't be able to see, but if you're watching this, you'll notice that I've had a wry smile on my face just while you've been answering there, Stuart. I was just reflecting the number of times we talk about validation. We have talked about validation on this show. One might think that it was an absolutely crucial, foundational part of running a startup.
I didn't realise that. And hopefully Opus Clip, when it produces the post, can recognise sarcasm.
Yeah. So it is vital, and kind of joking apart, we will keep repeating those things on this show that are important, because repetition, as Tony Robbins is quoted as saying is the mother of all skill. So I did want to finish on this last question from Jay, a relatively new member of the Tech Startup Founders Academy. And his question was, when do you quit versus when do you push through? How do you know if you should keep going or if it's time to walk away? There could probably be a whole episode on this question. But what are some kind of big takeaways, if you like, in answering that question? Sure.
My goodness, that is first of all, it's an excellent question. Short answer, I have no idea. Longer answer, slightly longer answer. Hang on. No, I'm trying to be funny here, but it's not working. Slightly longer. It depends. It depends. So it depends on, and I can imagine, you would guess I was going to say that. It depends on many things, such as how certain you are this is never going to work, or this is going to be too expensive, time-consuming, stressful, etc. I mean, I've been in positions where it's kind of so close, and it also depends on you as a person and as a founder. And I believe that if you are someone who gives up easily, you won't succeed as an entrepreneur and as a startup founder. So that people who give up are filtered out anyway. So assuming you're someone who doesn't give up easily, are you then getting to a point where you're not giving up when you should give up? If you think about it logically.
Yeah, I think that's another of the questions. How do you know whether you are beating your head against a brick wall or not?
That's right. Well, I'm breaking it down. I'm breaking it down into the different scenarios, and then getting to the real question, which is, am I not giving up when I should give up? Because giving up when you shouldn't give up, that separates the kids from the adults. Let's say, I won't say men from boys, but because so how do you know when you should give up, even though you perhaps don't want to, or are not the sort of person to give up? That's a very good question. Like most of the things we talk about, it's gut feeling, and unfortunately, gut feeling comes from experience. And you can put me in a situation, and I would take a view on it for a particular founder or for myself. But that's based on my experience. But how does an inexperienced founder know? And it has to be, well, first of all, general advice.
Find a mentor is what I'm hearing loud and clear. It's like find someone you can talk to.
But separate to that, absolutely. And as I said, I can give a view on any given situation based on my experience, and I generally can justify it. Generally can say, this is why I think what I think. You can ignore me or not ignore me. But general advice, when you're making a big decision, make the decision, write it down, but don't do anything that's irreversible, or don't announce it to the world and then have to backtrack. But kind of mentally make that decision and then sleep on it. If you wake up with an uneasy feeling, your subconscious is telling you it might not be the right decision. If you wake up, it's spring in your step with that relief. Oh, finally!
Great sense of relief. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or it might not be a great sense of relief, but it might be like you might not feel uneasy. You might not feel bad. You might think, yep, okay. And you might be thinking about, all right, what's the next step? Then your subconscious is not telling you it's the wrong decision. And the subconscious is a powerful, powerful thing that is underestimated and underutilized. I think this is one way where these important decisions, just sleeping on it, can help you.
And where does the pivot live in that question? Because it might be that, yes, Jay's feels like he's banging his head against a brick wall, when it's like with his offering or product as it is at the moment, and yet like a pivot a slight change or even a big change. And I was fascinated when I learned that Nokia started off making fishermen's clothing. I don't know if you know that, like way back in the day. So talk about pivots. But I also know, like PayPal, for example, they started off as a payment mechanism between Palm Pilots. I mean, that's like really niche, and they just it wasn't flying, and they pivoted, and look what happened to that. So where does the pivot live in this kind of pushing through question?
Yeah, pivots come in all shapes and sizes. You can have small pivots and big pivots. You might just adjust course slightly, or you might tweak something, and it might be that you're failing because of something very small, seemingly very small, but big impact. Such as your messaging and your marketing and your sales, such as how you show value in the product, for example. So you can make a small tweak. Now, what point does a tweak get big enough to become deemed as a pivot? It could be changing the problem, but it could be changing who you direct your efforts to. Because often you have a range of people with the same problem, and those people might be different demographics, different geographically, whatever. You can pivot who you sell to. And again, I mentioned earlier about, you might have two people with the same problem with the same budget, but for one, it's a higher priority than the other. So it might be that you picking someone where it's a higher priority. So, and of course, the ultimate pivot is pivoting the problem you're solving completely. So
have you ever done that?
What I've done is more trying to get products working, but at the same time, try to automate or delegate. So having a team that's kind of running that product and making small changes and tweaks and trying to do it, and then at the same time developing another product either for the same person or even completely different. So it's not so much as doing one thing and then stopping completely and then doing another thing. But I've been lucky that I had some early successes that allowed me to have some people who could sort of take over a lot of the sort of support and maintenance and admin for a product while I created new products. So they ran in parallel, which means it's much less risky for me because pivoting is if you completely pivot, you've got the problem of if you have any paying customers, how do you ethically sunset them? And one of my close friends is doing this now. He wants to sunset the product, but he has a responsibility to existing customers. So it's not straightforward. Now, if you're pre-customer, that's different entirely. So I haven't done it. Actually, let me think. Have I done it? I've certainly stopped. With a product. It wasn't achieving my definition of success.
How long did you give it?
Oh, I don't remember. Probably not long enough. Probably a year. It was more trying to help children rather than thinking, oh, this is a viable product that can is a viable business. So I was subsidizing it, but trying to get it profitable, and I was getting revenue but not profitability, and it's a shame because the product was there to help children to learn to code properly as opposed to how they're taught now. But that's a whole other story.
That kind of circles back to the very first question we had about if your product is for schools and charities and building a sustainable business around that.
This was I don't remember how long ago, over 15 15 plus years ago. So I've learned a bit since then.
Well, there's as always, it's never a one and done thing with these questions and these answers, and I'm sure we'll revisit them in different forms and different ways over the coming weeks and months. We're about out of time, though, Stuart. So, on behalf of everyone that's on the call live and who's watched it back, thanks as ever for your time and your experience and your insight and your willingness to kind of just your willingness to talk straight about it. It's just raw, unvarnished, unfiltered. It's really refreshing.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope there were some valuable takeaways there. I felt like today my answer was very purely it depends, and it's a judgment call. So hopefully there were some valuable takeaways.
Yeah, I think different people always get different things, even if they're hearing the same thing. And I think for those who have ears to hear, there'll be some definite golden nuggets in what we've talked about today. So thanks again, as always. It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from him, Stuart Prestedge. Until the same time, same place next week. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.